Thank you, Vinny, for coming on the show and joining me today. You are a serial entrepreneur and investor. You've been involved in crypto since the early 2010s, as I understand. Done a wide variety of things and had success in a number of different ways over the years. So it's great to have you on and looking forward to talking about a few things. First and foremost, if you could just sort of, for those who don't know you or what you've done, tell people your story and ideally from as early as you're willing to start to where you are today and some of the decisions you made along the way.
Yeah, so I'm South African born, if you can tell from my accent, and I moved across. Well, I'll go back a little bit. I mean, I was born in South Africa in like middle of the apartheid era, so 1979. So I'm 42 years old. I grew up in a small town on the coast, and South Africa went through a pretty turbulent time. So for those who don't know, in sort of the late 70s to late 80s, eventually Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1991 or 1990, and went on to become the first democratically elected president of South Africa in 1994. And so this is while I was kind of a teenager growing up, and by the time everything kind of opened up and South Africa was admitted into the world, because there were sanctions against South Africa. It was kind of like like Cuba was treated for a while, for many decades actually. I think it was at least a couple of decades where we were at least partially sanctioned, and then the heat got turned on. So as the world opened up, I became obviously more and more aware of what was going on and technology, and I was just always fascinated by computers and computing. I programmed at a very young age. I was into computers basically my whole life, and went to study information systems at the University of Cape Town. And afterwards, I got involved in the 1999 sort of .com sort of craze in South Africa. I worked at a couple of local companies over the early 2000s where we were in a bit of a tech slump for a few years. And then I started my own search engine marketing company in 2003 in South Africa, and sold a big stake out of it in 2007 and raised money for my new company, Yola, which I took to the States in 2008. We raised about $40 million for that back in those days. It's a website publishing platform. I left there in 2011, started a company called Gift, which is a mobile gift card platform. And in 2013, as we're building out the Gift platform, which is basically mobile gift cards, we had a huge payment purchasing problem with credit cards. And so we had to figure out how to take payments over the internet from countries around the world without having to have credit card chargeback risk. And so Bitcoin was on my radar, and we added it. We became the first major company in the sense that so many people could use it. And Bitcoin, we accepted thousands and tens of thousands of Bitcoins through our platform over a couple of years. We wound up becoming the biggest Bitcoin payments rails from people using Bitcoin to buy stuff. And sold the company to First Data, the world's largest payment company, in 2014. And I started investing even more heavily in the crypto space back then, and started a new company called Civic in 2015, which is still a digital ID blockchain-based identity company, the first blockchain identity company actually. And we've built a lot of IP patents, infrastructure. We've set up identity.com, which is the nonprofit foundation we support to decentralize identity on a global scale. Ran an ICO in 2017, one of the first, one of the largest, very cleanly. And back in 2017 was kind of a scary time, but we're still around. And I stepped down as chairman last year. I stepped down as CEO into the chairman role last year, and Chris Hart now runs it. And just been involved in crypto for many years as an investor, as a partner. I joined Multicoin Capital as a general partner in 2018 when they were just starting out. Actually, it was late 2017, and led the Solana deal, did a whole bunch of other things in crypto as well. I've just been around for a while, I guess.
Yeah, it's certainly an impressive track record. Like you said, you're just in your early 40s still, but you've done a lot. I wasn't kidding in the intro. You started a number of companies at this point. I'm curious, one sort of interesting question I think is, having started as an entrepreneur in South Africa, coming out of college in Cape Town. It sounds like you took one of your companies, maybe it was Yola, and you had maybe started it in South Africa and sort of moved it over to the US and started operating out of here. Your first company, I think, was purely in South Africa. What was like the difference trying to start a company and build a startup in South Africa versus later on in your career being able to do so in the US? And I'm curious, have things changed in your view with sort of the globalization of everything and now COVID and people working remote? Is it easier maybe to start a company in a foreign country now than it was when you started? How do you think about that?
Yeah, my first company was actually, I think I spent about 4 months a year in the US. So we were all our clients were not in South Africa. We just did the work from there. So I was traveling a lot in the US, and eventually that's why I decided to move here. Um, you know, I'd say back then, there was no way you should start a company outside Silicon Valley, and that's why I packed my bags and moved. I think the exact opposite is true right now. There's no way you should start a company in Silicon Valley if you can help it, and you starting other parts of the world is going to be way better for lots of reasons. I don't go into the details, but I think that the edge that Silicon Valley had on startups has been reduced probably 80%. Maybe there's a small edge now, but not much. And I think some of the best products and services I'm seeing built outside Silicon Valley. And a lot of it's got to do with regulations, right? So in the crypto world, the US has got the most draconian regulations in the world. I mean, when you go to these sites to participate in IDOs and ICOs and whatever else, it's like, hey, you have to certify that you're not a resident of Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Iran, and United States. So, we're being lumped in the list of countries where, like Iran, North Korea, and the United States, you don't really want to be on that list where people don't accept you and accept your money. So from a capitalism perspective, we're missing out on lots of deal flow and opportunities to invest on a global scale because the rest of the world doesn't want to deal with the US regulations. And quite frankly, like my take on this is US regulations are meant to protect investors, but like, why do we need investor protections in the world of the internet today when you should be responsible for your own money, where you put it, checking reviews, looking at track records, doing diligence? Like I get like in 30, 40 years without the internet, there was this huge information asymmetry of and tons of scammers out there, and there's still scammers today. But like the protectionist approach we have to trying to stop people from losing money is kind of stupid because on the one hand, you won't let an educated person who's not an accredited investor put $10,000 into a startup, but they can go to Vegas and drop $100K in a weekend. That's okay. So it's kind of silly. And so we're in this really weird space where US laws are making it very difficult to innovate in crypto for crypto companies.
So, I mean, you're still, as far as I can tell, you're still living in the US, right? And you're still operating mostly out of the US in terms of partner at Multicoin. I think you're also doing some stuff in South Africa, but how do you think about for yourself personally, you're still relatively young and, you could do a lot of things in the future. How do you think about potentially, do you think about leaving the US for your next company? If there's gonna be another company, do you think about starting that outside of the US? Does it depend if it's crypto or not? How do you think about sort of the changing landscape? And is a lot of this due to sort of crypto regulations and some of the accredited investor stuff, or is it also sort of amplified by COVID and what's happened in the last couple of years here?
I live in California, and it's probably the most, again, so best and worst part of America for lots of reasons, taxes and everything else. But it's where I choose to live. It does mean there's a lot of things I can't participate in, I can't do. I'm a general partner in a venture capital fund in South Africa as well, called Newtown Partners, and I co-founded Silicon Cape Initiative, which is a nonprofit in South Africa to, turn Cape Town in particular in South Africa into a bit of a technology hub for Africa. So I'm involved in a number of things. I'm also a shark on Shark Tank South Africa, so I'm one of the sharks on that show. I have a global footprint, but I think my comments specifically relate to crypto, and so a lot of the stuff we do in South Africa is, Newtown Partners runs a logistics fund. A lot of the stuff on Shark Tank is kind of everything from clothing businesses to cupcake businesses, very standard stuff. So that the regulations don't really matter there. So I think my comments really are still related to regulations around crypto and the limitations that are placed on US investors. and like Wyoming's trying to change some of that, and I get that the states are, it's in a state of evolution. But I know a ton of really bright, brilliant people in crypto that have moved to Puerto Rico, um, Portugal, Dubai, other parts of the world, Singapore, Hong Kong, because they can't build great companies in the US in crypto, and they've executed building them. I mean, look at Sam from FTX. He's built FTX up in Hong Kong. I mean, it should have been a US company, but it's not.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've been working on, you mentioned Silicon Cape Initiative. You've been working on bringing tech, making Cape Town a tech hub for several years, excuse me. And like you said, it used to be that it was hugely advantageous to start a company out of Silicon Valley, and that advantage has at least sort of decreased, if not sort of totally disappeared and potentially even reversed. Are you seeing, like, over the last couple of years, a lot of changes with sort of your initiative down there, a lot more entrepreneurs willing to sort of locate in South Africa and Cape Town generally, gaining some momentum, or some of that momentum going on in other places like you mentioned, and not so much Cape Town as of yet? I'm curious how sort of like the global, it seems that the talent is very much sort of leaving Silicon Valley and arguably like New York and some of these other traditional hubs, and moving to places both domestically, like you mentioned, Wyoming, Miami, Austin, all these sort of tier 2, tier 3 types of cities, but also internationally. Is a lot of that sort of coming to Cape Town, or still a little bit of a work in progress? How's that initiative been going for you?
Yeah, I think South Africa's got some serious issues to deal with right now as a country. And I think it's holding its back. I mean, some of the immigration policies aren't great, so getting talent into the country is a little hard. Some of the overall policies in the country are just broken. The corruption is still pretty bad. It's interesting. It's an interesting country. I think it's a lot of potential. Probably needs a change in the political landscape in a couple of years, which is definitely overdue. I don't think that people are moving to South Africa for crypto. I think people in South Africa are doing crypto, and that's fine. I think if you're going to go anywhere for crypto in the US, Miami, Austin is probably the top 2 places right now. Outside the US, I'd say definitely Portugal, Lisbon is on the rise in a big way. I mean, if I had to pack up and leave the US today, I'd probably go to Lisbon.
It's interesting. I know there's a fair number of challenges down in South Africa. Changing gears a little bit, you obviously, you came up, like you said, sort of during the .com craze, graduated college shortly before that, and just sort of jumped right into being a serial entrepreneur, starting a couple of different companies. A lot of people draw parallels between the last few years of crypto and where we are now, and they sort of rewind and say like, oh well, .com craze, maybe we're still in like 1995, or someone says we're in 1999. People have their differing views. Having sort of experienced both now, being obviously you were sort of fresher out of school back then, but nonetheless you've been sort of operating at the core of both of these very interesting sort of revolutionary times. Do you draw comparisons between one or another, or do you think any of those are misguided? Where do you sort of put us now, and how do you sort of compare across these different evolutions?
On a similar timeline, I'd say we're somewhere in 2005-ish, where there's still some doubt about the future of crypto, but we're not at the point where, like, it's like kind of when Facebook was going to IPO in 2012 or something. People were still doubting Facebook, and there was still, I think we've got a lot of skeptics. So we're somewhere between 2005, 2012. We're not in the golden age just yet. And I think crypto moves much faster. So I think, within the next 12 months, we'll see a huge, comeback, because there's a lot of amazing tech that's being deployed right now. So I don't think we're going to go through another major bear market like last time. I hope not, but I'm pretty certain it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that traditionally there's been these sort of hype cycles in crypto. People sort of loosely peg them to like the halvings with Bitcoin. Of course, now things are a little bit different. In 2017, Ethereum was sort of a major player already, or at least becoming one, and now 2022, it's not just Bitcoin and Ethereum, but there's a huge long tail, and Bitcoin dominance isn't quite what it used to be. So people, rightfully so, I think, question whether we're still in that sort of like hype cycle pattern, or how to think about things. Is Bitcoin going to get flippened by Ethereum? Are they both going to get flippened by something maybe like Solana? How do you have any like sort of well, let's go back a little bit first. When did you sort of first discover Bitcoin? You mentioned that you guys incorporated a gift, but I'm curious, like, did you first come across it and be like, it's not a big deal, and then later you realize, like, hey, actually, this is something, there's huge demand here among like a pretty niche group, and if we accept it for these gift cards, then maybe that's a good use case for it. I'm curious, sort of like the origin story for how you got into crypto, and then what it was like being one of the first companies to actually enable people to use it in practice.
So I heard about Bitcoin, I think it was on TechCrunch at some point. I didn't pay much attention to it. And then it was 2010 or 12, 11. Probably should have paid more attention to it then. So 2013, it kind of resurfaced and it's on the rise again. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I bought some early on, and it went up to this, went up 5x in a few months before crashing back down. And that was like my entry into it. And I was like, this is pretty cool. I use it for transactions, move money around. Like, this is very cool. And I kind of I became a Bitcoin maximalist for the next 4 years until 2017, when the scaling issues and debates happened. I was like, well, this is not going to work. So I think, quite frankly, I wasn't a big believer in Ethereum either, because Ethereum, I thought the single threaded computer system is just really hard to scale globally. And the cost at the time wasn't an issue. It's become a big issue. When I met Anatoly in 2018 and we looked at Solana, I was like, well, this is actually really interesting. And the way he scales it and the way the insight and depth of knowledge he has in blockchain was actually quite second to none, really, and still is. He's one of the best blockchain guys in the world, clearly. So as someone who thinks about this thing and has been in the space for a long time, I think it's very unlikely that we don't have, but it's very unlikely that Bitcoin and Ethereum stay 1 and 2 forever. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen. I think it'll be on the back of increased usage and adoption of another protocol. And I think Solana's probably got a good shot at least beating Ethereum, possibly beating Bitcoin, but at least beating Ethereum, just because of its just the growth of developers, the ecosystem. We're seeing a lot of developers leave Ethereum and no one's going back. So I haven't heard of any engineer that's gone from Ethereum to Solana and then back to Ethereum. And so it's kind of like a one-way street at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, devil's advocate, there's not a whole lot of people like you would have to basically have gone from Ethereum to Solana to sort of go back to Ethereum. Solana is just still relatively new, comparable to Ethereum and of course Bitcoin. But I have heard, you're not the first person to sort of express that narrative of a lot of people seemingly wanting to build on Solana these days. You mentioned sort of first meeting Anatoly, recognizing that he was sort of a special talent, special blockchain knowledge sort of guy. I heard you on another podcast previously. You'd spoken about, I think you called them species changers. They're like these sort of 1 in a billion or 1 in 100 million type people that just sort of change the trajectory of the world. Like, obviously they have help and they have a team and everything like that, but like sort of they're leading this change and this change of trajectory by themselves. Elon Musk, sort of an obvious example that comes to mind. I'm curious, like I think you had mentioned Juan Benet, I think his name is, from Filecoin, as well as another one of these sort of types. How do you go, that's like 2 guys over the course of the last, I don't know, decade or so that you've discovered that you think like fit the bill. How do you go about sort of like first just discovering and like getting to even have like a first conversation with these sort of people, or is it just a matter of luck? And then secondarily, how do you know, like when you're in the room with someone like that, how do you say like, okay, this, there's a bunch of like reasonably successful founders and whatnot, but how do you say like this person's actually different? This is like, not a $10 million company or $100 million company. This is like a a potential multi-trillion-dollar protocol guy right here, or this is the next potential Elon Musk right here. What makes like that difference for you?
I mean, the other guy is Jules Urbach from Render. I think what he's doing in GPU compute and the metaverse is incredible. It's one of those things where it's not always obvious in the first meeting. Sometimes it is. It was very obvious when you met with Anatoly. And I think it was obvious in the first in-person meeting with Jules. I think we had a couple of calls beforehand. It wasn't as obvious. So I think it's one of those things where it's hard to define. I really can't give you a definition of it and say this is how you see it. Like it's just it's kind of a bit of a mixture of gut feel plus just I don't know, just reading people. I don't really have a better way of explaining it. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
When you meet them, you just kind of know.
Yeah, so I'm not as familiar with Jules Urbach. I think you mentioned sounds like he's working on some like metaverse related things. Can you describe what's going on there? That's got you excited.
It's called Render.
Render.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious because like sort of the other guys, Filecoin's obviously been a big success since 2014, Solana since 2018. With Jules from Render, it sounds like you're sort of calling your shot that this is going to be potentially a very big deal.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like what's sort of like the elevator pitch on what's got you excited there?
I mean, the elevator pitch is that there's a couple of things, but first of all, I don't think anyone in the world really understands rendering like Jules does. He's probably one of the top 5 people in the world, along with the CEO of NVIDIA, and et cetera, that understands this industry. I think he's built a very powerful network with 10,000 plus GPU cores. And I think that we're moving into a world right now where GPU compute is in massive demand. I mean, which NVIDIA can't keep up with chips. They can't produce enough chips for GPU chips for rendering. There's tons of delays. We're having potential problems with Taiwan supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. I think that the world is going to have to move to distributed cloud compute for GPUs. And you may think we already have that. We don't have anything that's cost efficient right now. Amazon and Azure and the rest, they can't deliver what Render does. And they probably won't for a long time for lots of reasons. With AI and machine learning and the demand for GPU cores for compute purposes just rising, and then supply shortages, we're just in a state where I think that Render in the next 12 months just becomes the default. And I mean, Otoy, the parent company, produces software, Octane Render, which is used by thousands and thousands of artists, people uses it, etc. And so the demand for artists to use something like Render to render images and graphics in seconds versus hours is pretty high. And so I think we're going to continue to see that market expand and grow. So look at Jules, or look at Juan Benet, look at Anatoly, and there's probably dozens of others out there I haven't met, I don't know well, but these are the guys who make huge changes in technology and moves industry forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think you had quoted something like maybe a 1 in a billion type person, and if I'm misquoting, my bad. But it's basically you were saying like these are extremely rare people, and I couldn't help but think like, obviously these guys are incredibly smart and very rare talent, but I wonder if there's not, a fair number more of these people sort of out there that are either undiscovered by people who can bring, some experience and some capital and some advice, people like yourself, or maybe not totally undiscovered, but just sort of haven't been able to tap into their potential for whatever reason. And I think I'm optimistic that sort of over the next decade or the coming decades, maybe plural, especially with things sort of, Silicon Valley going into the cloud and whatnot, you don't have to be physically in any one particular place anymore, as we sort of spoke about earlier, sort of optimistic about the global emergence of talent and sort of discovery of some of these sort of incredible talents in the years to come. Do you think, do you agree, I guess, with that premise that we could be in for a couple of decades where maybe we were able to sort of get more out of, the global talent pool than we've been able to in the past due to this sort of globalization of technology. Everyone's got a mobile phone, et cetera, et cetera. Crypto, of course.
No, I mean, the talent pool globally is look. So talent doesn't just like pop out of nowhere, right? There has to be nurtured. You know, if you take a genius kid and give him no stimulation, no information, no education, you know, he's probably not going to do much with his life in the future. Like you need basics. You need to have the ability to read, the ability to write, and then work your way up mathematical skills, logical skills, etc., to get to the point where you can, you know, maybe you can argue that well, they can teach themselves at a later stage computer science. It's a lot harder without good educational structures. And what the internet has really done now is opened up education for the world. So you can just log on to Khan Academy or one of like thousands of education sites out there and teach yourself. So we've actually kind of bridged the gap now because education is basically free, where it wasn't when I was growing up. You know, you couldn't just get free knowledge and free information. The internet didn't exist really. So the world has changed, and I think that we are experiencing the benefits of people being able to teach themselves stuff over the internet. And so you're going to have more and more, you know, geniuses emerging because these smart people, like I got to the point where I just couldn't get enough information in my little hometown. The library was too small. Like there's nowhere else to get books from. There was, you know, it was just very limited information that I could plug into myself at a young age. I spent a lot of my time playing chess. And that was great, but that maybe taught me some sort of, you know, mechanics in my brain to do calculations and whatever else. But I probably was deprived of a lot of stimulus and information in other areas because I just, you know, the content was there. I remember trying to program and learn more advanced programming and just couldn't get books in advanced programming. There just wasn't anything. And like I mastered all the basic stuff. So that's how I would look at it. Is that I think that the internet has kind of flattened the learning curve in a sense. Not the learning curve, but the material. So everyone has access to everything from, you know, very basic to super advanced stuff, and now it's all about your commitment to learning as an individual. And so that will probably breed us a lot more, you know, people who can just again make a difference in the world.
Yeah, I think democratized access to education around the world. Like you said, you used to just have to sort of rely on your local library, and now you sort of go to your phone and you've got this, like, you know, YouTube to start, and then all these sort of education oriented sites and platforms as well. And I think hopefully we're only sort of at the beginning of a lot of those things as well. People needed the phone first, but now a lot of the educational platforms, I think hopefully will only get better and better in years to come, giving sort of more information and opportunity, like you said, to people like yourself when you were young, and you know, people all over the world that might have gone untapped if not for sort of these opportunities. Changing gears a little bit, your location on Twitter is actually the metaverse. Obviously a hot sort of buzzword these days. I don't know, you know, we went from sort of like everyone was excited about VR, and then that went through like a couple of hype cycles, and most recently metaverse seems to have like sort of taken a grip with a lot of people, and especially sort of like interfacing it with crypto gets sort of interesting. You've got Facebook rebranding their whole company called Meta. People are I think some people are excited, but maybe more people are sort of nervous about that. I'm curious to hear sort of like your take on the metaverse, sort of where we are now. Like, is it already here? Is there something big like Ready Player One that's around the corner that you're waiting for? Paint us a picture like the next, I don't know, 5-10 years, whatever your timeline is for what that sort of means to you.
I mean, it'll be a total guess, but I'll try to guess. I think we're at the earliest stage of the metaverse right now. There's going to be a couple of virtual worlds that form, and that's going to take 3 to 5 years. So you'll have Facebook's world, you'll have Somnium space, you'll have a whole bunch of these worlds that get created, and then once there's critical mass in a few of them, the real question is like, how do you enable interoperability? And so NFTs are playing a very important role in the metaverse right now, but you know, no one's incentivized to build someone else's NFTs out. So I think we're in a stage where everyone kind of sees what the vision kind of looks like, and guys like Jules has a sense, and people think about the metaverse. I think we're almost certainly going to get the time frame for adoption wrong. I think it's going to be, you know, 10 years before we actually have a functioning metaverse. but I think that we're doing the building blocks for it right now, and that's kind of my guess. I don't think it happens in the next year or two.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a good deal of momentum, and certainly the term has been thrown around a lot, seemingly increasingly so over the last year or two. But to your point, it does seem like it'll take time for some of these things to develop, and whether it'll sort of emerge in more of a centralized way from either Facebook or maybe a few different players. You saw like the Microsoft acquisition just the other day.
Yeah, it's gonna be centralized first, and then it'll be decentralized afterwards. That's my guess.
Yeah, so that's an interesting view. Like you sort of, like we talked about earlier, you saw the internet come up as sort of supposed to be decentralized and then ended up centralized and now seems to be heading in the other direction. Is there just like a natural, is that just the way that things sort of come to be, you think? Is it like inevitable that things sort of flow from centralized to decentralized and back and forth like that, or no rhyme or reason? You just feel that, like, Facebook's in a better position right now to get started, but the decentralized alternatives are sort of coming after.
Um, I don't actually have a good answer for you there, because like I have wondered this as well. I think that centralized works better because you're able to control the experience a lot better for people, and then data is analyzed a bit better, so you can understand human behavior better. I think it's a function of UI, UX, etc., which is just hard to do in a decentralized world, and unique insight, and a couple of those things. Not sure entirely how we do it. I mean, Bitcoin is a perfect example. As a decentralized system, the UX is terrible. If you look at the Bitcoin client and the core client, and a lot of the basic Bitcoin code is bad, but now, obviously developers are building infrastructure on top of that, so that's fine. But it's just not very user friendly. And even today, wallets aren't that user friendly. I mean, some wallets are maybe a little bit better, but you still have issues around key management, etc. We haven't really solved self custody. In a mass market way where 1 billion people could use it safely yet. I mean, I think we've gotten close maybe in a couple of areas, but it hasn't, even if we have solved it theoretically, it hasn't reached mass market adoption yet. Maybe when Facebook or one of these centralized providers do it, then things kind of will change. I don't know. But humans tend to centralize first and then decentralize over time.
Yeah, so along those lines, self custody is one issue, obviously, but you were back, I think it was 2013. You started incorporating BTC into Gift, obviously super early, and people didn't really know, what Bitcoin was or what it was going to be at that time, and certainly some people's perspectives changed with the block wars and things like that. What has been like sort of surprising for you from the early days? I think it's about a decade probably now since you first sort of came across Bitcoin. It came onto your radar, and then you soon incorporated it onto Gift. You probably had some idea back then, maybe not like super high conviction, but you had some idea of what the future could look like for Bitcoin, and maybe some other projects that might emerge once you saw like Filecoin in 2014, for example. What have been like some of the biggest surprises as someone who's been in the space for so long? Things that we either don't have that you might have expected to see by now, something like NFTs that maybe was surprising. I'm curious, just sort of like expectations versus reality a decade in retrospect, what you think.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think what's really surprised me is that NFTs have really taken off in the past year more than I ever expected. I just don't have a good sense of how many unique individuals are in the NFT world. It seems like it's a lot of people, but I just don't know. I wish we had a better measure for how many. Like, is it 100,000 people making a big noise, or is it millions of people? Like, I just don't know, and we don't have the data to prove it. And that's the one thing which I think is I'm shocked at the amount of volume that OpenSea is doing every day. It's insane, and I'm trying to understand, like, is this just a bunch of whales, or is it lots of like people, and how big is this? How big is the population of NFT users?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I don't have an answer certainly, and it is curious as well. Like, sort of it started off as like NFTR, and there are people like Beeple, and then seems that things have sort of gradually turned into like, okay, well, the profile picture sort of thing is now like a large bulk of all the NFT traffic and value. And like, is there going to be another profile picture type of sort of category that emerges as like the next big thing? Or are people going to be using this for like in metaverse games, and you get one sword and you can use it across all these different worlds and things like that are sort of next gen versus just like, okay, here's the classic like JPEG argument, and like, it's cool and it's nice, you can sort of represent ownership, but are there better use cases, and what are they going to be? I think it's hard to say, and it's hard to know how many people are actually involved. Like you said, is it just sort of the whales playing around with a lot of their games, or are people actually sort of getting involved from zero into the space and like getting their first crypto experiences with these NFTs?
Yeah, it's exactly. It's just very hard to tell. And I think when Coinbase launches their platform, it might be a bit better if we know how many unique users are actually in it. Because like one person can have multiple wallets, so it's just very hard to tell how many unique users there are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know we're coming up on time, so Vinny, appreciate you sharing your time with us today and your perspective. Again, like super interesting track record, just the success from an entrepreneurial standpoint, as well as investing and being in crypto since very early on. It's very cool to see, and I'm looking forward to other projects like Render that you're getting involved with, and seeing what's in store for the future. But before we leave today, where can people go to continue to follow you and sort of what you're interested in and investing in and all the like?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to find me is Twitter at Vinny Lingham. Reach out, follow me, and let's keep the conversation going.